Good morning, dear friends, and welcome to the Sunday morning program. We are always so happy to be with you all and look forward to seeing you each week. We have a very special program this month, and we hope you enjoy it. To commemorate this historically significant and blessed centenary year in honor of the ascension of Abdu'l-Baha, the Sunday morning program and the beloved spiritual assembly of the Baha'is of Loudoun County wish to express their venerated love in remembrance of the tireless and selfless service of the beloved Master Abdu'l-Baha, who raised the banner of justice, equality, equity, love, unity, and oneness during his time in the United States and around the world. We lovingly welcome our dear Baha'i sister, Mrs. Baharieh Rouhani Ma'ani, who will be presenting a 3-week talk series on this most auspicious month of November, honoring this 100th year of the ascension of Abdu'l-Baha. He was, as you know, designated by Baha'u'llah as the most great branch, the master and the center of Baha'u'llah's covenant. Mrs. Ma'ani will be speaking today on 3 most consequential women in Abdu'l-Baha's life. We hope you will join us each week to elevate and learn with us this series as we gather every Sunday at the same time and in the same Zoom link. We will now open with our devotional program.
My name is Abdu'l-Baha. My qualification is Abdu'l-Baha. My reality is Abdu'l-Baha. My praise is Abdu'l-Baha. Thraldom to the blessed perfection is my glorious and refulgent diadem, and servitude to all the human race is my perpetual religion. My name is Abdu'l-Baha. My qualification is Abdu'l-Baha. My reality is Abdu'l-Baha. My praise is Abdu'l-Baha. No name, no title, no mention, no commendation ever, no will I ever have except Abdu'l-Baha. My name is Abdu'l-Baha. My qualification is Abdu'l-Baha. My reality is Abdu'l-Baha. My praise is Abdu'l-Baha. This is my longing, this is my greatest yearning. This is my eternal life, this is my everlasting glory. My name is Abdu'l-Baha. My qualification is Abdu'l-Baha. My reality is Abdu'l-Baha. My praise is Abdu'l-Baha. Abdu'l-Baha.
Oh God, my God, aid thou thy trusted servants to have loving and tender hearts. Help them to spread amongst all the nations of the earth the light of guidance that cometh from the company on high. Verily, thou art the strong, the powerful, the mighty, the all-subduing, the ever-giving. Verily, thou art the generous, the gentle, the tender, the most bountiful.
Wow, what beautiful devotions. Thank you so much for those beautiful devotions. I wanted to welcome everyone again to the Sunday morning program and to introduce our co-MC for today, Ms. Sandra Maliki. Before she introduces our dear speaker for today, I wanted to give great thanks for the organizing committee for the Sunday morning devotion program, Sandra, welcome. It's so lovely to see you. And I look forward to hearing what we have in store today.
Good morning, everyone. Today, we're honored to have with us Mrs. Baharieh Rouhani Ma'ani. She's from the lineage of early responders to the cause of the Bab and Baha'u'llah. She was born and raised in Shiraz, Iran, studied Persian literature at the University of Shiraz, and then went to Kenya as a Baha'i pioneer in December of 1960. In 1971, she was invited to serve on the staff of the Baha'i World Center and stayed there for 38 years. In August 2009, she relocated to Washington, D.C., where she is a researcher, translator, and author. She's published several books in English, the latest one of which is Leaves of the Twin Divine Trees, an in-depth study of the lives of women closely related to the Bab and Baha'u'llah. She has also published numerous articles in both English and Farsi on the status of women in religion and other topics. Her topic today is the 3 most consequential women in Abdu'l-Baha's life. So please join me in welcoming Mrs. Ma'ani. Mrs. Mahani, I think you can unmute yourself and begin your talk.
Yeah, thank you very much, Sandra, for that introduction. And to the Sunday morning program committee in Loudoun County, it's my deep pleasure to be with you this day, a most glorious day. It's the anniversary of the birth of Baha'u'llah. Happy birthday, everyone.
Happy birthday.
And Mrs. Ma'ani, today you will be assisted by Peyman Akhavan, who will be sharing the slides that you have provided.
Oh, how nice and gracious of Peyman to help me in that regard, because when it comes to technology, I'm really illiterate, or almost illiterate. Thank you.
Just a reminder for the dear friends who's joined us later that this program is being recorded.
Okay, you can go to the next slide, Peyman. Asiye Khanum is entitled The Most Exalted Leaf, also Nabwab. Nabwab means noble. Actually, the female form of Nabwab is Nabwabe, which she was called as a child, but Baha'u'llah addressed her as Nabwab. Nabwab is a unique personality in the history of our faith and maybe in the history of religion altogether. She is Baha'u'llah's faithful wife, the mother of Abdu'l-Baha, the successor of Baha'u'llah and the center of his covenant, also authorized interpreter of his writings. According to Abdu'l-Baha, the 54th chapter of the book of Isaiah contains a prophecy about his mother. Next slide. This is the prophecy, which is remarkable, considering that it was thousands of years ago when Isaiah revealed this prophecy. Now, I must ask that the photos of the people move to the top because they cover a part of the writings I want to read. Is it possible? Let me see. Okay, this is the prophecy. Enlarge the place of thy tent and let them stretch forth the curtains of thine habitation. Spare not, lengthen thy cords and strengthen thy stakes, for thou shalt break forth on the right hand and on the left, and thy seed shall inherit the Gentiles and make the desolate cities to be inhabited. For thy maker is thine husband, the Lord of hosts is his name, and thy Redeemer, the Holy One of Israel, the God of the whole earth shall he be called. How do we know that this prophecy is about Asiye Khanum? One of the believers asked Abdu'l-Baha actually about this prophecy. Abdu'l-Baha revealed a tablet in which he said, it's about his mother. So that is the authenticity we need, that Abdu'l-Baha has confirmed that this prophecy is about his mother. Next slide, please. Abdu'l-Baha in two different places mentions the name of Asiye, that it's the name of his mother, and Asiye is accepted in the threshold of oneness, he says. For the daughter of Pharaoh had this name, also Asiye was the name of my mother, Abdu'l-Baha says. In the next reference, he says, that blessed the name which thou hast asked to remain with thee forever and become the cause of spiritual progress. That name is Asiye, which is the name of the mother of Abdu'l-Baha. I give the blessed name to thee. Obviously, one of the believers in the West asked Abdu'l-Baha for a name, and Abdu'l-Baha gave the name Asiye for her to use. Next slide. I searched the dawn breakers to find references to Asiye Khanum. I found 2 references. None of them contained the name of Asiye. And I have quoted them here, this one and the next one. In this one, he says that's Nabil. Says, one day Mirza Ahmad conducted me, that's Nabil, to the house of Baha'u'llah, whose wife, the Barakatul Awliya, the mother of the most great branch, had already healed my eyes with an ointment which she herself had prepared and sent to me by this same Mirza Ahmad. So this tells us that Asiye Khanum had knowledge of some home remedies, homeopathy, whatever it is. And this is the testimony of Nabil, that the ointment she made herself and sent to him helped his eyes. Next. The other reference is in Nabil again, when Baha'u'llah was in Kermanshah on his way to Iraq. He summoned Mirza Ahmad and Nabil to his presence and bade us, Nabil says, depart for Tehran. Mirza Ahmad was instructed to remain in Tehran until his arrival and was entrusted with a box of sweetmeats in a letter and a letter addressed to Aghay Kalim. Aghay Kalim is Baha'u'llah's brother who was in Tehran, who was to forward the gift to Mazandaran, where the most great branch and his mother were residing. So this piece gives us the information that when Baha'u'llah was on his way to Iraq to spend about a year there, at the request of the Prime Minister of Iran then, Asiye Khanum and Abdu'l-Baha and the rest of the family were actually in Mazandaran. Next. This slide is about Baharieh Khanum's recollections of his mother. Baharieh Khanum was interviewed by Lady Bloomfield and recorded some of the recollections of Baharieh Khanum. Here she says, she recounts the events that occurred in Tehran when Baha'u'llah was arrested and imprisoned in the Siyah. This is the background to it. She says, I was a child. I think this is actually from Abdu'l-Baha about his mother, sorry. He says, I was a child about 9 years old when we were surrounded by calamities and assaulted by the enemies. They had thrown so many stones into our house that it was full of stones. We had nobody except mother, sister, and Agha Mirza Qoli. Agha Mirza Qoli is Abdu'l-Baha's youngest paternal uncle. He continues, to provide us with better protection, mother took us from the gate of Shemiran to the Sanglaj location, where she found a house in an obscure lane, and she looked after us there. She strictly forbade us to leave the house until one day our living circumstances became so difficult that mother told me to go to my aunt's, that's Baha'u'llah's sister's house, and tell her to use all means at her disposal to find us a few Quran. Quran is about the word of Quran is about a cent. It must have been worth much more than what it is now. Abdu'l-Baha continues, my aunt's house was in the Taqiyeh of Haj Rajab Ali. Then he explains how when he got the money and was going back, he was pursued by children. One of them shouted, Babi, Babi child. And that was enough to get other children, other boys in the location to get out and start following Abdu'l-Baha. Abdu'l-Baha enters the house of someone that was familiar to him. There he says, the house of Haj Mullah Ja'far Estarabadi was near. When I reached there, I took shelter in the entrance area of the house. The son of Haji Mullah Ja'far saw me, but he neither prevented me nor did he disperse the children. I stayed there until it was dark. When I left that place, again the children pursued me. They shouted and threw stones. When I reached the shop of Agha Muhammad Hassan Sanduqdar, the children did not come any closer. In brief, when I reached home, I was so tired and fearful that I collapsed. Mother asked, what is the matter with you? But I could not respond. I passed out suddenly. Mother took the handkerchief containing the money and put me to sleep. The reason I'm sharing these quotations from Abdu'l-Baha's recollections is to show you how difficult life was for Asiya Khanum and her 3 children when Baha'u'llah was arrested and imprisoned in the Siyah, which lasted for 4 months. If it weren't again for Abdu'l-Baha relating these stories, we would probably not have known what Asiya Khanum, his mother, had gone through during that time. Next. The greatest holy leaf also, as I said before, has shared her recollections of that time when she was interviewed by Lady Bloomfield. She explains when the Babis were arrested, how they were tormented and put to death. She says it was customary not simply to condemn them to death and have them executed by the state executioner, but to hand the victims over to various classes of the populace, such as butchers, shoemakers, blacksmiths, and others, to carry out their pitiless inventions on the Babis. And as they were busy inflicting injuries upon the victim, a drum was loudly beaten and the mob crowded to witness the scene. She continues, these horrible sounds I well remember as we 3 children clung to our mother, she not knowing whether the victim was her own adored husband. She could not find out whether he was still alive or not until late at night or very early in the morning, when she determined to venture out in defiance of the danger to herself and to us, for neither women nor children were spared. How well I remember, she says, cowering in the dark with my little brother, Mirza Mehdi, the purest branch, at that time 2 years old, in my arms, which were not very strong, as I was only 6. I was shivering with terror, for I knew of some of the horrible things that were happening and was aware that they might have seized even my mother. So I waited and waited until she should come home. Then Mirza Musa, my uncle, who was in hiding, would venture in to hear what tidings my mother had been able to gather. My brother Abbas usually went with her on these sorrowful errands. Nobody at all of all our friends and relatives or relations dared to come to see my mother during these days of death. But the wife of Mirza Yusuf, the aunt of my father. The reason this lady could provide some information and dared to meet with Asiya Khanum is that her husband was actually a Russian subject. And because he and his wife had the protection of a foreign country, they were exempt from persecution, because then the government that had offered them citizenship would have taken issue with the government of Iran. So that was a blessing that this aunt of Baha'u'llah was available to provide information and relief. Next. After 4 months in the Siyah-Chal, Baha'u'llah was released on condition that he leave Iran forever, never to return. So he decided to go to Iraq, a place close to Iran and familiar to Baha'u'llah, because he had been there before. In a prayer describing the intense sufferings he endured in the Siyah-Chal, Baha'u'llah makes reference to his banishment to Iraq soon after his release from prison. Addressing God, he says, "Thy decree was irrevocably fixed, and thy behest summoned this servant to depart out of Persia, accompanied by a number of frail-bodied men and children of tender age. At this time, when the cold is so intense that one cannot even speak, and ice and snow so abundant that it's impossible to move." Imagine Baha'u'llah with his wife Asiya Khanum, who was with child then on the way to Iraq, and 2 children traveling for 3 months to get to Baghdad, because they had to travel by donkey and by horse. We will see what Baharieh Khanum says about that trip in the next slide. She says this journey was filled with indescribable difficulties. My mother had no experience, no servants, no provisions, and very little money left. My father was extremely ill, not have recovered from the ordeals of the torture and the prison. No one of all our friends and relations dared to come to our help or even to say goodbye, but one old lady, the grandmother of Asiya Khanum. We 3 children were very young, my brother 8 and I 6 years old. Mirza Mehdi, the purest branch, was very delicate, and my mother allowed herself to be persuaded to leave the little fellow, only 2 years old, with her grandmother, though the parting with him was very sad. My poor mother, how she suffered on this journey, riding in a takht-e-ravan, borne on a jolting mule. And this took place only 6 weeks before her youngest son was born. Takht-e-ravan, for those who may not know, is a kind of cabin mounted on a donkey, on a mule. And imagine this donkey with this cabin in which women sat and old people, going through the mountainous area between Western Iran and Baghdad. The greatest holy leaf says about her mother, never did she utter one word of a complaint. She was always thinking of some kindness for somebody, and sympathy she gave unsparingly to all in their difficulties. When we came to a city, my mother would take the clothes and wash them at the public baths. We also were able to have baths at those places. She would carry the cold, wet clothes away in her arms. Drying them was an almost impossible task. Her lovely hands, being unused to such coarse work, became very painful. Next, please. Then Baharieh Khanum talks about life in Baghdad. She says, Asiya Khanum, my dear mother, was in delicate health. Her strength was diminished by the hardships she had undergone, but she always worked beyond her force. Sometimes, she says, my father himself helped in the cooking. The hardships she had endured saddened the heart of her divine husband, who was also her beloved Lord. He gave this help both before his sojourn in the wilderness of Sulaymaniyeh and after his return. However, this blessing did not last long because Baha'u'llah left Baghdad and went to Kurdistan for 2 years. Concerning that, the greatest holy leaf says, our grief was intense when my father left us. He told none of us either where he was going or when he would return. So we, my mother, my brother, Abbas, and I, clung together in our sorrow and anxiety. During this time, the darling baby brother born after our arrival in Baghdad became seriously ill. Our guest, that's a reference to her uncle, Mirza Yahya, who had left Iran in disguise and joined Baha'u'llah in Baghdad and was an uninvited guest in the house of Baha'u'llah. She says, our guest would not allow a doctor or even any neighbor to come to our help. My mother was heartbroken when the little one died. Even then, we were not allowed to have anybody to prepare him for burial. The sweet body of our beautiful baby was given to a man who took it away, and we never knew even where he was laid. I remember so clearly the sorrow of those days. Next. This is about Baha'u'llah's sojourn in Sulaymaniyeh. In his message in Persian of 25 December 1939, Shoghi Effendi refers to the blame, dispraise, and slander aimed at Asiya Khanum by the people of envy during the 2 years that Baha'u'llah spent in the mountains of Kurdistan. He also refers to the humiliation, cruelties, and transgressions that she suffered at the hands of the stirrers of mischief. Shoghi Afendi's statement reminds us of Isaiah's prophecy about Asiya Khanum, when he says, "For the Lord hath called thee as a woman forsaken and grieved in spirit, and a wife of youth, when thou wast refused, saith thy God. For a small moment have I forsaken thee, but with great mercies will I gather thee. In a little wrath I hid my face from thee for a moment, but with everlasting kindness will I have mercy on thee, saith the Lord thy Redeemer." Isaiah chapter 54, verses 6 to 8. It's amazing that so long ago, a prophet would have said these things about this lady about whom we are talking today. Next. There were two events, most happy events in the life of Asiya Khanum during the stay of the family in Baghdad. One of them was Baha'u'llah's return to Baghdad from his 2-year sojourn in Kurdistan in 1856. He left in 1854 and returned in 1856. So that was by far the happiest experience of Asiya Khanum in Baghdad. The second one was reuniting with Mirza Mehdi, entitled The Purest Branch, after a 7-year separation. Remember, she left him when he was 2 years old with her grandmother. And after 7 years, he rejoined the family in Baghdad, and it made Asiya Khanum so happy. Next. After 10 years in Baghdad, Baha'u'llah was asked to leave the city for Constantinople, Istanbul. And that is when Baha'u'llah went to the Rizwan Garden and declared his mission. At that time, Asiya Khanum, other female members of Baha'u'llah's family, and younger children were not with Baha'u'llah when he arrived in the Rizwan Garden. They joined him on the 9th day of his stay there. On the 12th day, Baha'u'llah, his family and companions left for Constantinople, then the capital of the Ottoman Empire. After 4 months in Constantinople, Sultan Abdul-Aziz issued his infamous edict, banishing the exiles suddenly and without any justification whatsoever, in the depth of winter and in the most humiliating circumstances, to Adrianople, situated on the extremities of the empire. Next would be about life in Constantinople and Adrianople. The journey from Constantinople to Adrianople lasted 12 days, entailed tremendous hardship. It was in Adrianople that Mirza Yahya's treachery reached its peak. Mirza Yahya is Baha'u'llah's younger brother, who had the ambition of being the Bab's successor and created a lot of problems for Baha'u'llah. His excessive passion for leadership prompted him to plan and commit the heinous act of poisoning Baha'u'llah in Adrianople. Although unsuccessful in achieving the hoped for result, It made him very ill. It made Baha'u'llah very ill. The illness lasted for a month, increasing tremendously Asiya Khanum's anguish for his safety and well-being. When Mirza Yahya's misdeeds betrayed his unsuitability for membership in the community, the Great Separation took place. The Great Separation is a term that Baha'u'llah himself uses when he separated from Mirza Yahya, and it became known that there was no hope for Mirza Yahya accepting Baha'u'llah's authority. Shoghi Effendi says these events shook the believers and made the countenances of the beauteous branch, that's Mirza Mehdi, and the most exalted leaf, Asiya Khanum, to glow with ever-increasing brightness in the midst of all calamities. After about 5 years in Adrianople, on 12 August 1868, Baha'u'llah, his family and companions left this far corner of the European continent, entitled by him the remote prison and the land of mystery, for the final place of exile, the citadel of Akka. So this was the last place where Baha'u'llah lived. And there were several stages to that leg of the exile. Next, please. The greatest holy leaf, after explaining the hardships of the journey from Adrianople, says, at length we arrived at Haifa, where we had to be carried ashore in chairs. Remember, ladies in those days did not really generally travel because the conditions were very, very hard. Here we remained for a few hours. Now we embarked again for the last bit of our sea journey. The heat was so overpowering. We were put into a sailing boat. There being no wind and no shelter from the burning rays of the sun, we spent 8 hours of positive misery. And at last we had reached Akka, the end of our journey. The landing at this place was achieved with much difficulty. The ladies of our party were carried ashore. All the townspeople had assembled to see the arrival of the prisoners. Having been told that we were infidels, criminals, and sowers of sedition, the attitude of the crowd was threatening. Their yelling of curses and execrations filled us with fresh misery. We were terrified of the unknown. We knew not what to fate. We knew not what the fate of our party, the friends, and ourselves would be. We were taken to the old fortress of Akka, where we were crowded together. There was no air. A small quantity of very bad coarse bread was provided. We were unable to get fresh water to drink. Our sufferings were not diminished. Then an epidemic of typhoid broke out. Nearly all became ill. This is when Baha'u'llah and his companions were confined in the army barracks in Akka. Next. Here in Akka, in the army barracks, where they were imprisoned, Asiya Khanum experienced the most painful event in her life. According to Shoghi Effendi, Mirza Mehdi, the son that Asiya Khanum had left at 2 in Tehran, when Baha'u'llah and his family went to Baghdad. The boy that joined his family after 7 years now is in Akka in the barracks. And according to Shawqi Effendi, he was pacing the roof of the barracks in the twilight, wrapped in his customary devotions, when he fell through the unguarded skylight onto a wooden crate standing on the floor beneath, which pierced his ribs. Mirza Mehdi was served as Baha'u'llah's amanuensis. On the afternoon of that fateful day, he presented himself to Baha'u'llah, who said he had nothing for him that day to dictate, and bade him to go up on the roof, which was his practice almost daily. That's where he paced the roof and prayed. There was an unguarded skylight. He was very mindful of that skylight on other days. But on this day, he was so wrapped in his prayers that he missed the skylight and fell through it onto the floor beneath. Next. Asi Khanum, when she heard this terrifying sound, came out of her room to see what had happened. When she saw her beloved son laying on the floor in excruciating pain, she tried to reach him and give him a hug, but she passed out. The purest branch, seeing her mother, despite his excruciating pain, reached out to her to embrace her. Others gathered, took him off the floor, and put him in a bed. Abdu'l-Baha ran to Baha'u'llah and begged him to save his life. Baha'u'llah told him, leave him to his Lord. Abdu'l-Baha realized the divine will was something else. So he advised everyone to be resigned to the will of God. This is what Baha'u'llah says about his son. He says, I have, O my Lord, offered up that which thou hast given me, that thy servants may be quickened, and all that dwell on earth be united. What a precious ransom Baha'u'llah and Asiya Khanum offered. Asiya Khanum went to Baha'u'llah and said she was resigned to the will of God and begged Baha'u'llah to accept the sacrifice that she had offered. Next. The first part of this slide I have already said in my own words. The second paragraph says, Nabil says that at that time, Asiya Khanum, the grief-stricken mother of the purest branch, attained the presence of Baha'u'llah, prostrated herself at the threshold of his grandeur and said, my Lord, I entreat thee to accept from me this ransom. The blessed beauty conferred his bountiful favors upon her and advised her to be patient. Asiya Khanum responded, whatever is thy good pleasure. That indeed is my heart's desire and my best beloved. Neither could Asiye Khanum nor any other member of the family accompany the body on its journey to the Nabi Saleh cemetery in Akka, where it was laid to rest. They were prisoners and could not leave the barracks. None of Asiye Khanum's numerous woes and sufferings compared in magnitude to the loss of her beautiful son in the prime of his age. Next. Shortly after the tragic death of the purest branch, the stringent conditions imposed on the prisoners for 2 years eased. The prisoners were required to take up residence within the walled city of Akka. Baha'u'llah and members of his family moved to quarters in the vicinity of the barracks, which was needed by the army. After a brief stay in 1 or 2 houses, they moved to the house of Abud. The house of Abud is a well-known holy place in Akka, and the pilgrims get to go and visit it. That's where the family stayed for 7 years. Next. You can see how effective the offering of the sacrifice of Mirza Mehdi was, that soon after his martyrdom, as Baha'u'llah calls it, the doors of the prison opened and they could move and live in the city. That was one of the almost immediate effects of the fall and the martyrdom of the purest branch. A very happy event for Asiye Khanum and the whole family that happened in the house of Abud was Abdu'l-Baha's marriage with Munira Khanum. I will be talking about that episode during the 3rd session of this series, when we talk about the wife of Abdu'l-Baha. So I won't, in the interest of time, I won't talk about it until then. Let's see what else is there next. When Baha'u'llah left the citadel, the walled city, to go and live at Mazra'e, Asiye Khanum stayed with Abdu'l-Baha and his family in the house of Abu, where lived also the greatest holy leaf. Baha'u'llah visited them periodically, at times spent a few days with them. When Asiye Khanum fell from an elevation and hope of recovery for her was lost, Baha'u'llah visited her in the house of Abu. He was at her bedside when she passed away in 1886. Next. Baha'u'llah revealed a tablet of visitation in honor of Asiye Khanum, in which he gives an account of her life, the sufferings that she endured. In that prayer, he bears witness that she endured all the hardships and sufferings that he had borne, until she offered up her soul in his path before his countenance. He testifies that she believed firmly in God, in his books, his prophets, and in all that has been sent down from the heaven of his will. He bids her rejoice in the highest paradise for having been mentioned by the King of Names, and reaffirms that she attained unto all good, that God elevated her to a station round which circled every glory and high station. He addresses her as the most exalted leaf. He then addresses the people of Baha thus. Next, please. This is the prayer that is usually recited at her resting place. Baha'u'llah says, "O faithful ones, should ye visit the resting place of the most exalted leaf, who hath ascended unto the glorious companion, stand ye and say, salutation and blessing and glory upon thee, O holy leaf, that hath sprung from the divine low tree. I bear witness that thou hast believed in God and in his signs, and answered his call, and turned unto him, and held fast unto his cord, and clung to the hem of his grace, and fled thy home in his path, and chosen to live as a stranger out of love for his presence, and in thy longing to serve him. May God have mercy upon him that draweth nigh unto thee, and remembereth thee through the things which my pen hath voiced in this, the most great station. We pray God that he may forgive us, and forgive them that have turned unto thee, and grant their desires, and bestow upon them through his wondrous grace, whatever be their wish. He verily is the bountiful, the generous. Praise be to God, he who is the desire of all worlds, and the beloved of all who recognize him. Asi Khanum was buried in a cemetery in Akka. Decades later, Shoghi Effendi transferred her remains and those of the purest branch to Haifa and had them buried in the neighborhood of the greatest holy leaf's resting place, and then developed the monument gardens in a most beautiful manner. Since I will be covering this in the next session, which is about the greatest holy leaf and the significance of her resting place, I won't go into any detail about it now. I think this is the last slide. Let's see if there is anything next. Yeah. That's it. Thank you very much for your attention and for your patience.
Wow. Thank you so much, dear Baharieh June, for sharing your research on Nawab Asiya Khanum, a remarkable woman who's been referred to by the prophet Isaiah. Is that correct? What you said. I am so happy that I made it to today's session so that I could hear all of this research. And also let us open the floor so that people can ask questions. I'm going to be co-facilitating with Sandra. So if you would like to ask a question or make a comment, friends, you can raise your hand in the participant window or type your question in the chat box. To raise your hand, you just click on participants at the bottom of your screen, and a window will open at the bottom. You can click on raise hand. If you're typing a question in the chat, please begin your question with a question mark. You can address your question to the entire group or privately to me or Sandra, and either of us will share just your question. And one thing to keep in mind is that really this is a conversation. we have the benefit of hearing this research and hearing what, being reminded of things that we may have noticed in our own studies. But really, this is a moment where we have the opportunity to hear from each other and to build on our exploration by commenting. So if there's something that, even if it's in your own experience of how what you've heard or what you've learned about this remarkable woman has changed your own life, or maybe perhaps some reflection on what you heard here today, please feel free to share that. It's not just about Q&A, it's about having a conversation. So, and we will try to do your time justice. It's 11:44. Baharieh, June, are you going to be available for some time after 12 o'clock to entertain questions?
Yes, I'll be.
Okay, wonderful. So if we do go over, we will close the program with the recording and the devotions at around 11:57, and then we will resume again after the 12 o'clock after the devotions without recording, so that the friends can also feel comfortable to share if they can stay. Without further ado, if you have a hand raised, I see dear Armin has her hand up. Armin, go right ahead and ask your question.
Hi, thank you so much. It was a very emotional presentation. But there's something I'm confused about because I didn't know about. The baby that passed away when they arrived in Baghdad, who was that baby? It was Baha'u'llah's baby?
Yes. Asiya Khanum, and when they left Tehran, Asiya Khanum was pregnant.
Oh my, she was, where did she have this baby?
She had the baby in Baghdad about 6 weeks after arrival in Baghdad.
What was the name of this baby?
The name was Muhammad Ali, I believe.
And the baby just died? I mean, at that.
He became ill, and because the guest that they had in their home, he was very fearful of being discovered, and he would not allow any doctor to visit the baby or neighbors to come to help, and the baby died.
It was like a newborn, was it?
I don't know how old he was, but it was during the time Baha'u'llah was in Sulaymaniyah, so he must have been at least 1 year.
Thank you. I had no idea. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thank you for that question. I was always curious about that myself. Had you all heard these elements of the life of Nawab? Was everyone already familiar with this material? Parya, please speak up.
No, I can say that Baharieh Khanum, what a incredible wealth of knowledge and what sacrifice and research you have done in really bringing this to us. I wanted to thank you. What a powerful and moving presentation. And I think it makes us feel grateful that we share in this history, because sometimes I think humanity has a way of making us feel alone in our sorrows, and hearing how the most beloved souls of this earth who walked and sacrificed and what they had to endure for such greatness to be held, that we get the bounty of really benefiting from. And I'm very grateful to you, Baharieh Khanum, for sharing this and bringing this and doing this incredible search of this information. And I really look forward to the upcoming talks. And I just wanted to express my sincere gratitude. Thank you, Baharieh Rouhani.
You're most kind. It's really my honor and pleasure to have been given this opportunity to talk about the women of the Holy Family, who had a great share, as Baha'u'llah himself testifies. They shared most of the sufferings of Baha'u'llah and during the different stages of his life, especially his wife. His wife, Greatest Holy Leaf, these two had the lion's share. No wonder Greatest Holy Leaf is the most outstanding woman of the Baha'i dispensation. Thank you.
Thank you.
I believe Payman has his hand up.
Yes, thank you so much for the presentation. My question was in regards to Mirza Mehdi. Is there a reference that once he passed away, Baha'u'llah mentioned that he's going to be the sacrifice so that world peace can come to the world? Am I correct in that, or I can't remember the exact reference? Is that correct?
Yeah, he says something, I'm paraphrasing, for the unification of the world and the quickening of the people. You know, it's both for unity and for people to be awakened to the spiritual energy that Baha'u'llah brought with his teachings. So, yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Unification of the world is not possible without peace. So one can read into it, but the words he uses, I think, are unification and quickening of the people.
Can you speak a little bit to the situation, maybe in Baghdad as well as in other places that they stayed, where what the role that Asya Khanum Nawab played in managing the household, or I believe they weren't even allowed to go out of the house at some point in some places because they were women and they could not conduct certain affairs that women can conduct today. So how did she manage? I don't know if you came across anything in your research that you could speak to.
You are right. Women mostly stayed inside the house. Greatest Holy Leaf mentions the women that Tahirih had taught when she was in Iraq. These women came to visit them. I found it very interesting that these women from years back, and despite all the persecution, they still dare to go and visit Asya Khanum. But when Mirza Yahya arrived, he didn't want anybody to enter the house because he was afraid to be discovered and persecuted. He was a very self-centered person. And after that, Baharieh Khanum says she was 7, 8 years old. She wanted to go and play with the daughters, with the girls in the neighborhood. He would not allow her. So definitely they were almost like prisoners in their own home. And but because it was close to Iran, Baghdad is close to Iran, the means of travel were very primitive. But men could travel back and forth and meet with the men of the family, with Abdu'l-Baha, Mirza Musa. But women didn't have that pleasure and bounty. And Baharieh Khanum says her mother was so delicate and so overwhelmed with all the things she had to do that Baha'u'llah helped with the cooking. I found that very interesting. And that Baha'u'llah, despite all the things he had to do, he did offer such a help. It's a good lesson for other husbands that help in the household. I mean, traditional husbands, but it's a good role model for them. Yeah, and conditions were not easy for women, especially when Baha'u'llah was in Kurdistan. And then they had to take orders from someone like Mirza Yahya. While he was there, Mirza Yahya dared not do it. But when he was absent, Mirza Yahya thought in Baha'u'llah's absence, he was the authority. Life was really difficult.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
I believe there's a question in the chat. Can you please explain in detail how she passed away and how old she was?
She fell from an elevation. She had gone out of the house of Abbud. She was somewhere. She either missed a step that she fell. She fell from an elevation. And it was the year of her death is 1886, 6 years before Baha'u'llah's ascension. Although she was younger than Baha'u'llah by, I think, 3 years, but she passed away 6 years before Baha'u'llah.
Thank you so much. And also, there's another question in the chat asking, while Baha'u'llah was gone for those 2 years in Sulaymaniyah, how did they manage financially? Who paid for their food and clothing?
Good question. The simple answer is that I don't know. But Asiye Khanum had her own resources because she had come with a big dowry that she sold a lot of it and spent on the journey from Tehran to Baghdad. The families were wealthy, the families of Asiye Khanum and of Baha'u'llah. I don't know how much they helped, how they helped. The Baha'is who were visiting also, it was the practice, it was the custom to go with gifts when they arrived at a certain place. And so they had their own resources that they used to maintain them. I don't know the details.
Thank you. There's another question. Somebody wanted to know, what insights have you gained in your research from the lives of these beautiful, beloved, staunch women, and what advice you could give to the young women of today, what we could learn as universal truths to elevate both the work and the cause of the oneness of humanity, and as well as the empowerment of women, which is just as relevant.
My humble advice is make it a practice to know about their lives. There was a time when we didn't have the account of their lives, no matter how small. But now that the book Leaves of the Twin Divine Trees has been published now for 12 years, the purpose of it was to bring ourselves into the consciousness of these women and bring them back to life, their memory. I mean, some of them have, like Monira Khanum wrote her own autobiography, is there, although it's scarcely available. But to see what sacrifices they went through. Very often when we go through a small test, we may lose hope or wonder why God is doing this to us. When we read the accounts of these wonderful women who suffered all their lives, I get so emotional, even when I reread those accounts, that what can I do to emulate them? So by knowing these accounts of their lives, we can use them as example for our daughters, ourselves, our sons, and see that the faith we have inherited hasn't come to us simply. We are riding on the shoulders of these wonderful people in the early history who went through so much to leave us with such a great gift that we can now freely teach have core activities and enjoy all the blessings, not all the blessings, but some of the blessings Baha'u'llah has brought, and we'll have more of it. So that, I think, that was at least my purpose in doing the research and writing.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone, for attending. I wanted to, before I pass it back to Sandra to end the meeting, I wanted to acknowledge that Baharieh has posted the name of a recent book by Baharieh Rouhani Ma'ani called Leaves of the Twin Divine Trees in the chat. And she's got the link to it on Amazon for those of you who'd like to obtain a copy. Baharieh, you have your hand raised. I just wanted to mention we have 1 minute before we have to stop recording. If you'd like to say anything, I see you took your hand down.
Thank you. Forgive me. I just wanted to add that this is a book that dear Baharieh Khanum has written over many years. I think she just mentioned it was 12 years ago that it was published, and it is being sold on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, and many of them. But this is actually the first book ever published on these incredible women of the faith in the ministry of Abdu'l-Baha. And we have dear Baharieh Khanum to thank for that. And hopefully, as she mentioned, others will follow this lead and example and learn more and more so that we can elevate the empowerment of women, but also the sense of equality and oneness in the world. Thank you again, Farnaz Jun and Baharieh Khanum.
Thank you.
Thank you, Baharieh. Sandra, you're on mute.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us. And we hope you will join us again next week when Mrs. Ma'ani talks about the greatest holy leaf. It will be the same Zoom link and password. And at this point, we will conclude with our closing prayer. Thank you.
Thank you for that beautiful song. I think that the translation I posted may not have been the correct one, but I happen to have found a different one, so you all can use your own judgment or faith. If you don't speak Farsi, I just posted the second one as well. Dear friends, now we have the special bounty of not being recorded so that we can speak perhaps more freely for some of us and continue the conversation. Dear Baharieh, how long do you have to stay on the line?
I can be available for about 10-15 minutes, even more if needed.
Thank you so much. We already have a question from Armin.
Oh, the recording isn't stopped yet.
Sorry, we'll definitely cut the ending of that recording.